My job is to lay out sort of the basics of FOIA, and I understand that many of you are familiar with the basics of FOIA, from how to file a request to how long it should take to what might block your request, and you're getting the records and what happens then. What I'm really going to do is explain what the law says and where it sort of breaks from where reality breaks from what the law says. And hopefully somewhere as we finish this up, you'll realize why FOIA is only being used by journalists in very specific ways nowadays and why that's a problem. And then maybe during the Q&A we can get into, it'll help you ask some questions about things you can do to get around these problems that I'll raise. And given that it's going to end up getting pretty dark, frankly, I'd like to start out with some positive, which is why do we even bother? What good is FOIA if it doesn't actually work as well as we want it to? Well, it still does a lot, obviously. I mean, you've heard a lot of what Tax Analysts has done over the years and the great work that you guys have done in pulling out records from the IRS and probably other agencies as well. But I mean, it ranges from everything from the big to the small. I took these from Rick's site, sunshininggovernment.org, where there's a *stories, something we call the FOIA files. ASNE is a member of Sunshine Government Initiative, so I'll say we a lot. I mean, there's plenty of really interesting stuff there, from the CIA spying on Martin Luther King and its attempts to support coups in Chile in violation of law in the 70s. And some of you probably read the series and a couple of stories in the Washington Post about the 1976 bombing of a former Chilean diplomat in the United States, which was, I thought, fascinating and done largely because a lot of those records were eventually declassified and released by the government. And that story would absolutely not have happened. So there's example one. The FBI had spied on John Lennon through the years. We now know why, or maybe ask why. Safety hazards in the Ford Pinto's gas tank were revealed through the Freedom of Information Act. We know why the Hubble telescope failed due to the Freedom of Information Act, why we spent millions, if not billions of dollars on that, and why it didn't work, and hopefully we'll make sure it never happens again. And we learned about the dangers of Agent Orange. A couple others that I really like is, like to point out, really important ones are that after Hurricane Katrina, was it the USA Today or the Associated Press that did the look at the levees, other levees built by the Army Corps of Engineers around the country, and found that the majority of the 122 levees were not up to code either in other places around the country, putting other cities at risk all over the U.S. Another one was that someone from the Marine Times did research and found through FOIA that the soldiers were being sent into combat in Iraq and Afghanistan wearing body armor that the government knew would not stop the bullets being shot at them. And they immediately, that actually immediately affected change that certainly saved lives. So right there, that's why we keep at this work, and that's why it's important. The brilliant part of FOIA is it's very simple. Anyone can use it. I mean, I literally mean anyone. Like you don't have to be a journalist, obviously. Journalists are only the third biggest user of FOIA, probably for some of the reasons I'll go into later on. In the U.S., you don't even have to be a citizen. You don't even have to be a resident. About the only person that cannot file a FOIA request is someone who's acting on behalf of a foreign government who might be filing it with certain defense or intelligence-related agencies. But anybody else can do it, and it's not hard to do. I mean, there's 3 or 4 systems that you can use right now that will automatically let you basically do a plug and play, generate a FOIA letter, and in some instances email those off to the agency you're trying to reach, including iFOIA.org, muckrock.com, and FOIAmachine.org. And if anybody has questions about any of these links or any other information, you can definitely reach me afterward. So the key, though, especially because it's so easy in practice to file a request that a lot of people are able to do it and do it, the key is filing the right request. We know that not only does the law prohibit fishing expeditions, it's not a good thing to do in practice. I know there's a tendency to say, well, I don't know exactly what I want. I sort of know what I'm looking for, so I should write broad. One of the early tips I will give you is not to do that. FOIA requests are not written in an hour. They may not even be written in a day. They're probably written, in 2 to 3 days, if not a week, and they require polishing and rewriting just like any of your stories. Because what you're supposed to be asking for are records, not information, not answers, records. And it requires that you reasonably describe the record sought. And the government agencies, and if they want to do this just to make things tough on you, they can reject your request if you haven't described a record that is within their possession. And of course, records include more than just paper documents. They would include photos, tapes, computer files, things like that. The good news is, as of changes made 20 years ago, you are supposed to get the records in any form or format in which you request them, which I know, for instance, with financial documents, is pretty useful to get things in a non-PDF format that allows you to pick and choose what you want to hone in on, and even compare things to other, particular parts of a budget, for instance, to another aspect of that record. As long as it's reasonably practicable for the agency to do so, they're supposed to. Now, when you file that request, they have 20 days to grant or deny your request. And really what that means is not 20 days to give you everything you need. It's 20 days to say, yes, we have what you want, we'll get it to you. No, those records don't exist, or something along the lines of, yes, the records exist, but there may be some exemptions, and they're going to engage in the search and review process. So we've already run into basically one of the problems here. A lot of people are able to and do file FOIA requests, which means every year the number of requests being filed is increasing. What's not happening every year is the number of people staffing these requests coming in. That's not increasing. So we are seeing an increase in backlogs. Now, hopefully technological changes and other incentives through the bill Rick's going to talk about are going to help fix that. That was a major part of, major focus in getting that bill passed, was to reduce the backlogs and make things process more smoothly. But it's still, that is the number one biggest problem, I think, for journalists, especially using FOIA, is time and deadline. One of the other things you need to be aware of is the ability, again, through changes made over a decade ago, 20 years ago actually, the opportunity to do multi-track processing. Up until about 1996, it was a first-in, first-out process within agencies only. Now agencies are allowed to, but don't have to engage in multi-track processing, which means there is incentive to you to write requests specifically, simply to get on what we would call a simple track and out from behind all those maybe big rigs on the FOIA highway to get your very simple request answered more quickly. Those 20 days, by the way, do stop if the request has to go to multiple offices, if the agency has to go back to you for clarification, or if exceptional circumstances exist. So again, these are all incentives to think about what you're writing, think about how to craft your request, and make sure that the agency doesn't have problems understanding what you need. Help them help you. You can get expedited processing, which reduces the time frame to 10 days, but that's actually really difficult. And I would say, it's where information is needed to save the life or physical safety of an individual. Not sure how many people in this room are going to be falling under that, but if you're a reporter or a person who is otherwise primarily engaged in disseminating information, any request concerns a matter of compelling need. Are any of you going to be commercial requesters, or are all of you journalists? I'm going to assume some people are commercial requesters. It's important for the commercial requesters to know that you have search and review fees that can get pretty expensive pretty quickly. They can range, certainly into the double digits. That's dollars per hour to search the records and review them for potential redactions. Copying, if you're getting paper copies, can also get expensive. Of course, non-commercial users get waivers of these fees, and that includes representatives of the news media. Technically, these fees are also supposed to be waived entirely, the processing fees, if the government does not meet its required deadline. In fact, though, I think it's about 4% of all requests actually involve fees at this point. It's really a pretty small number. So as you heard, there are 9 exemptions to FOIA. I can run through them very quickly, if I can remember this in my brain. Exemption number 1 is information properly classified pursuant to executive order because it would affect national security. Exemption number 2 is internal agency records or internal agency rules or procedures. Exemption number 3, which always bothers me because it's number 3, is the catch-all. It's where Congress writes another statute that specifically says these records shall be withheld. And then there's really no discretion. The agency has to withhold them. You see a lot of these with regard to intelligence and finance as well. Number 4 is probably one that people here are familiar with, commercial business or trade secrets. Number 5 are internal agency memoranda, basically attorney-client privilege documents or work product documents, deliberative process documents, things that are not the final decision of an agency, but the thought process behind it. And again, one of the big changes in the FOIA Improvement Act of 2016 was to open that up a little bit. Number 6 relates to clearly unwarranted invasions of personal privacy. Number 7, law enforcement investigations. Number 8, financial and banking records. And number 9, oil, gas, and water well records. I've been teaching this one for a while. The important part isn't necessarily what the records say. They're all in 552B, 5 U.S.C. 552B, so you can find them there. What's important for you to know is that withholding is actually not mandatory in many of these instances. It's optional. And there is a concept called discretionary disclosure that you should actually point out to the agency when making a request, or certainly when your request is denied. And in fact, discretionary disclosure is kind of now more or less, again, another change in the law relates to this, but it's really something that's supposed to occur now to the greatest extent practicable. Unless there is a foreseeable harm that would result from the release of the records, you're supposed to get them, even if exemption technically does apply. So it's something you need to sort of keep in your back pocket if you are able to play that card or need to play that card. But I would certainly put it up front. Now, what happens when your request is denied? Well, you have to exhaust your administrative appeal first. That is very unlikely to be successful because what you're doing is going to the head of the same agency that just denied you, not any independent review board. The good news is there is an independent board that's there to help you now. How many of you are familiar with the term OGIS? All right, couple. Office of Government Information and Services. The FOIA Ombudsman. All right, my work here is going to be useful. All these things were created, they are the same thing. It is an independent office currently housed within NARA, the National Archives. And it is supposed, we used to call it the FOIA Ombudsman. It's an independent office that's supposed to act as a go-between between requesters and agencies. They're very good at unsticking problems, procedural things. The agency won't get back to you. The agency won't talk to you. The agency won't pick up the phone to answer your questions. Substantive matters, whether something has been wrongfully withheld, they're not as quick to weigh in on that, and that's another thing Rick and I especially have been pushing on. But I do, and now actually, through changes in the law, I keep trying to, preempt you.
Please.
When you get a denial, you are not only supposed to be told about your right to appeal in the denial letter, you are supposed to be told about the Office of Government Information Services. I'm telling you now. It exists, it's a good resource, they're great people, and they will try to help you as best they can. And if that doesn't work, you're going to go to federal court, or you have the option to go to federal court. Of course, the reality is, as I've gone through all this, the process can take months, if not years, because, there's a combination of reasons. Number one, you may not have written, as I said at the beginning, a request that gets you to where you need to be as quickly as you'd like to get there. You can do more. And even as advocates for journalists, I am, unflailingly, almost apologetically saying to members of Congress, staff, and agencies, yes, we need to teach our side better to help out in this process. Number two, as I said, is the overburdening of staff and resources. A reason you need to do better is they need to do better. We simply, there's one real answer to FOIA that probably will never happen, certainly hasn't happened. More money needs to be put into this, whether it's more staffing, more technology, and those are the two big items. But until there is just more capability to move things through the system, it will always be somewhat slow, and you need to just accept that and deal with it. Number three is there's not really any real enforcement mechanism on your side. You file your request, and assuming everything goes well and it actually gets to the agency, there's no enforcement mechanism if they do not meet their own deadline. The lack of imposing fees or a fee waiver if the time deadline isn't met isn't really a stick, isn't really a penalty of any kind. And as well, they know that the onus is going to be on you to move things along. If an agency, despite the ability and now the prodding to engage in discretionary disclosure, doesn't do that and still withholds documents, and you think that they've been wrongfully withheld, the agency knows your option. Your only option is really to go through what is probably an exercise in futility, the administrative appeal, and then go to court, which is something that requires that you spend money and time that you don't have. I mean, yes, the changes to give you attorney's fees if you're successful and broadening the definition of what is success in federal court to mean any time you get the records after having gone to court as opposed to winning a court case is a wonderful thing. Again, we pushed for it for a long time leading into 2007, but it's probably not enough for a reporter working on deadline or anybody working on a deadline. That's why FOIA tends to be used as the starting point and maybe the middle point in long-form stories, the starting point for any story, the starting and middle in long-form stories, and basically things where you really need database type, you need that sort of statistical information. I found that reporters still really go for that from FOIA. But other than that, it's really becoming a weaker arrow in the quiver that that reporters need to bring every day to work with them, the tools that you are bringing to work. And it's an uphill battle. And again, we can talk more after hearing from the rest of the panel about what other things you can do specifically to make it just a little easier and stronger. Thanks.
Thank you.